We're honored and blessed to have Reverend Barber with us now. Yale is blessed to have Reverend Barber in the Divinity School. Oh. He's the professor of the practice of public theology and public policy and the founding director of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at the Yale Divinity School. He serves as president and senior lecturer of Repair of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and has been pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church for the past 29 years.
Retired in May, 30 years.
30 years. 30 years.
June, retired in June.
I am so thrilled. I first met Reverend Barber when he came to give support to the Advancement Project, which I helped start. That's right. And I met him because he's good friends with another friend of mine who is working with Forward Justice. That's right. Down in North Carolina, and who is doing, as some people in the Justice Department said, the only weapons-grade voting rights work in the country. So, Reverend Barber, we're honored. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I want to ask them to play a little video because really I want you to see the people more than see me. When we talk about repairing the breach and we talk about the Poor People's Campaign. And so just let's take a look at this video. Open your eyes, open your ears, open your hearts, and try to see fusion, what I call fusion, moral fusion politics at work.
We must be honest about the foundations of the political and economic systems we call America. I love America because of her potential, but I know that America will never even get close to being a more perfect nation until we are honest about the politics of rejection.
I want to tell you about some of the leaders who are building the Poor People's Campaign. Callie Greer from Selma, Alabama, who had to bury her daughter, Venus, because she didn't have health care.
I'm here today to share my daughter's Venus's story. Venus discovered a small lump in her breast and she wasn't insured. Venus had to be approved for every prescription and every piece of medical equipment that she needed. I'm standing here today in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign because no one should have to bury their child in America because they don't have health care insurance.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am a working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
I'm a second-generation fast food worker, and I've experienced the cycle of poverty firsthand. Growing up, I watched my mother endure long hours of back-breaking labor, doing everything she could to feed me and my sisters. My employer barely pays me enough to pay rent and utilities, let alone with the medical expenses with my mother.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. My only chance of going to college was joining the Army.
It was one thing to know that you didn't have water and you couldn't afford your water. It's a whole nother to find out that they shut off your entire community and none of you matter.
But when I lost my housing, health care, and income all at the same time, I was terrified, panicked.
Now, I'm also a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide at a far greater rate than the national average.
Hi, my name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama, and I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on power.
This is the largest encampment in Aberdeen. There's about 1,000 people in a town of 16,000 who are homeless.
In my community, we were all shut off in a day because none of us could afford our water bills. In the past, my family wasn't able to afford electricity in the winter. It was very hard on all of us.
But the indigenous people in the surrounding communities that are being affected, we talk about health care. We talk about worrying about the environment, but yet when they're allowing open pit mines and letting it leak into the land, into the water, the high rate of cancer and the high bills of health is going to continue to raise because of corporations and greeds and politicians that don't want to listen.
There's a new chemical company that's producing another carcinogen. In our community, it's amazing the people who just started dying of cancer.
This wall, this is sin of the highest order.
I put my life on the line at 17 years old to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now what we have domestic enemy right here.
When there are 38 million poor children, when 60% of African Americans are poor, when 65% of Latinx are poor, when 40% of Asians are poor, when there are 67 million poor white people, we must say, this is not right.
Somebody's hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
Our brothers and sisters are sleeping on the streets. For a country this rich to have so many people poor, it's immoral and it's wrong.
Our backs are against the wall, and we got no choice but to push.
And together we will proclaim liberty throughout the land for the enslaved, for the poor, and for us all.
Followed that breaking news in Albany, where a large group of protesters have moved into the street.
Washington Avenue between City Hall and Lark Street closed down.
Protesters with the Poor People's Campaign of Indiana.
2 o'clock on the East Coast, 2 o'clock in the middle, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. A wave, and the historians tell us it's never happened before.
Our communities, Muslim communities, who have joined the Poor People's Campaign, you can count on us.
Our democracy is in trouble. Our democracy is in trouble. And we come to demand.
And we come to demand. Second warning.
I cannot stand here and claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ and be silent about the moral outrage that is going on in our country.
Because it's crucial that we make ourselves heard. No one is listening.
We are the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are here. We are poor. We are clergy. And we're here to say to our nation's capital and to the highest court of this land that everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to learn. Everybody has a right to love. Everybody has a right to living wages. Everybody has a right to vote. Everybody has a right to thrive in this society.
Everybody say, "Ah!"
I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. Freedom fighter, and he taught us how to fight.
The poor and their clergy. We read Article 6 of the Kentucky State Constitution that says we have a right to free assembly.
We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
We demand the right to vote. For formerly
you need to cease and desist immediately or you'll be arrested.
It's times like these when throughout history prophets have to arise to sound the alarm.
Together until humanity is respected and children are protected and civil rights and labor rights and human rights are never neglected. Now is our time. for a third Reconstruction. We are not an insurrection, but we are a resurrection. I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of power. I'm so honored that you would ask me to come today. You know, I come fresh from this morning. I'm not feeling my best, getting older. And I've been battling constant chronic pain for 47 years. But God is gracious and good. And sometimes, I don't know if some of you know about this, the side that's supposed to hurt stops hurting, and the side you've been dependent on starts hurting. And so you got to get that side worked on. So I've been getting some needles this morning, working on a knee. But you know, as I tell people every day, I'm glad to be seen and not viewed. Some of y'all catch that in a minute. And the other thing is I'm pretty open about my own personal struggles because I'm so tired of people living in this kind of hero and shero mentality that if you have a disability, you are somehow different. When in fact, almost everybody that we know and look up to had some major physical challenge. Moses stuttered. Elijah Paul had a thorn in the flesh. Harriet Tubman had epilepsy. Abraham Lincoln had his own struggles with depression and with his heart. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had polio. Fannie Lou Hamer had polio. And then after she was beaten by two black men that were forced to beat her, she had all other kinds of arthritic pains and whatnot. Dr. King, when he delivered the speech, the March on Washington, actually was suffering from breathing disorder that was caused when a black woman stabbed him in 1959, I think, or 60. You know, the first attempt to kill Dr. King was not the Klan. It was when he was sitting at a table signing his book, Stride Toward Freedom. And a black woman came up to him and said, "Are you Dr. King?" And he said, "Yes." And the next thing he knew, a letter opener was that close to his heart. And at the last speech that he preached, he talked about that. He talked about how the doctor said if he had sneezed, just like that he would have died. And how a young white girl wrote him while he was in the hospital and said, "I heard the reports, and I'm just glad to know that you didn't sneeze. And that was one of the last things he told. And you know, all of us really have something. But sometimes I think the somethings that we have, I'm trying to work through this theologically, maybe there's some things that we have, the challenges that we have that we really can't get rid of, we have to live with. Maybe it's because they are there to try to make us compassionate. That's why I have a real problem with sick, mean folk. I like that governor down in Texas. How you be the cripple and mean? I'm just like, what? You know, I was down in Texas and what the hell is wrong with you? You can't walk. You cripple. You benefit from the government, benefit from health care, but then you want to block other folk from having health care. You know, instead what I think is whatever you have that you deal with, and I'm speaking to somebody this morning, don't be ashamed of it. You know, go in spite of it so that one day a record will be written of how you moved in spite of, right? And then whatever you have that you know is nothing but grace that's keeping you, be gracious to other folk. I'm honored to be here today. I want to mention one thing you saw on that film, and to my conveners, my brother, you know, I'm glad to hook up with these Yale radicals around here. Somebody asked me, "Why you coming to Yale?" I said, "Mind your business. I'll go where I want to go." Why didn't you go here? You know, people always want to have something to say. And I said, I'm going where they offer this opportunity to build a center for public theology and public policy, unlike what we've seen anywhere in the country. We're going to be doing cross-disciplinary work. That's why I'm here this morning. And our goal is big, and the vision is big. The last time something like this was attempted, Reinhold Niebuhr and Howard Thurman created a religion institute in the 1950s, and their goal was to turn what they call the militant ideology of love promulgated by Jesus into a theological strategy to address Jim Crow. And their first two students were James Lofton, Martin King, and Preacher Hall, who was the black woman that Dr. King actually got I Have a Dream from. He didn't get it himself. He got it from this black woman that graduated from Princeton. She was praying one day, I have a dream, and Dr. King heard her and did what preachers do, borrow. Y'all know how preachers borrow. I'm going to tell y'all this joke about preachers. This is what preachers do. Preachers will, and you didn't know this if you're around them, because this is exactly what they're going to do. They hear something really, really good, and they're going to take it, and they're going to get up the next sermon and say, what's your name? Vernita. They'll say, I was somewhere, and I heard Vernita say. And then they're going to quote what you said. Then the next time they're speaking, they're going to say, I was somewhere, and I heard somebody say. And then the third time they're going to say, I was somewhere, and I heard the Lord say. So just know that if you hang around preachers. That's what Dr. King did. But I want you to know one of the things you saw the Apache woman talking about what's going on in the reservations. One fight that anybody who's engaged in environmental justice ought to be following and ought to be concerned about is what's going on in Arizona, where before he died, John McCain wrote a rider into a military funding bill to turn over a part of the Apaches' reservation to a multinational company. And they want to destroy the mountain, drill down in, and there's a mineral down there. Whatever they dig up, it's only about 3% of what they dig up that will be usable. But here's the thing, that mountain is the Apache Nation's Mount Sinai. It's their national cathedral. It's their Mecca. And so there's this battle going on now in the courts about their religious rights over against a polluter, over against this company, right? And some people are having a hard time struggling with how to get in it. We're involved in it. I've been out there, been on the mountain. You know, if you get a chance, you should go out there where the Apache people have been fighting for years. Sitting Bull's mountain is out there. There's a story of how 150 Apache braves fought against the United States Army. They got them on a cliff, and rather than give up, they let them push them until each one of them fell off the cliff and were killed, but they would not back up. There's a story about how they forced the Apache people down in the lowlands. Apache people are mountain people. And they're known for running, and they're known for being up in the mountains, where they forced them down in the valley, and then one night they opened up the river to drown them all. And they have survived all of that. But now they want to take their Mecca. I mean, imagine that. Imagine the outrage that would be going on in this country if somebody was trying to take the National Cathedral just to drill for a mineral. Or if somebody was trying to take Mount Sinai or the temple in Jerusalem or the temple at Mecca. What the outrage would be. And yet, some people hardly talk about what's happening to the Apache people. Read up on that. Please read up on that. Google Winsler, who's former chief out there, Winsler. He's actually a modern-day Gandhi. He left the reservation. And I remember going with him one day when he had to go before the, what they call it, it's not the internal committee, it'll come to me in a minute, but he had to alert them he was leaving the reservation in the 21st century. Think about that. He had to go to Washington, D.C. and advise them that he was leaving the reservation. I remember sitting there with him that day crying and mad to watch this grown man in the 21st century have to say to this secretary, I'm leaving. And he said, and I'm leaving and I'm going to live on the mountain nonviolently. And if they bring those trucks up there, so they'll just have to kill me. But I'm not going to let you take our Mecca. I'm not going to let you take our holy mountain. And it is indeed holy. I've been there at night, 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've heard them speak. And when I speak of them, I'm talking about them who are divine. I've heard them in the wind. But the good news is, while we were there the last time, we were able to show the people that as they drill down in this mountain, if they do it, they're going to hit the aquifers. Well, guess what aquifers do? They run downstream. Well, guess what's downstream? A predominantly white city. Once we pointed that out, the white man in that city who had joined with the corporation against the Apache people has now quit. And now he's with the Apache people. Because what we did when we went there was to show interconnectedness, that you really can't hurt one people without in some ways hurting us all. So blessings to you this morning. Solidarity, understood in its deepest sense, is a way of making history. That's Pope Francis. And just yesterday I got the book Pope Francis just put out, the Vatican did, on his encyclical about environmental justice and connecting it to all other kinds of fights. And I did not know I was one of 13 people that responded to this encyclical. And you know, a Pope doesn't have to ask anybody to respond to anything. He can just write an encyclical and say, boom. But this Pope, trained in liberation theology, said, I know what y'all say about the Pope and my relationship with God, but I'm going to write this, and then I'm going to let 13 people around the country respond to it. And I was one, I don't even know how I got picked to go over to the Vatican and respond, and then to be a part of his economic policy. The Pontifical Academy is what they call it, where you wrestle with issues. And I've sat in the room with the leader of the Orthodox Church, you know, the Bartholomew I, and Nobel Peace Prize folk, and impacted people and lawyers as we wrestled with these issues. And that book has just come out. I hope you'll get a copy of it. And I have a piece in there. I also was there the day we were at the Vatican, and you heard that song, Somebody's Hurting My Brother, and it's gone on for, that song was born in an environmental fight by Yara Allen. It was actually, we were in Stokes County, and we were dealing with coal ash, and people were testifying about what had happened in coal ash because the same game had been run. The Duke Power had told the folk, we're going to put our coal ash pond, but we'll put it over here in the minority community. They didn't say it like that, but you know, they put it in the so-called black community. But we went there and showed people how water doesn't stay in one place. And you know, we told them, said, you know, if coal ash is so good, why don't you go get some ash and drink some ash and see what it does to your ash? But but there was a lady, my sister, in there that night who told how she had every disease that the environmentalists said you could get from coal ash. And she said, and I won't be here when y'all win this fight. And there was another white lady that came up and said the same thing. And Yara Allen was sitting in the corner. She's a theomusicologist, which means part of her role is she's part Pentecostal, part liberationist. When she sits in a room like this, she listens to the rhythms and the songs that are in the room as people testify. And then she creates on the spot, right, from what people are talking about, what they're feeling. And so I called her up, and she told everybody, I can't sing what I thought I was going to sing because a new song has come in the room. And the song said, she started singing, somebody's poisoning our water. Somebody's poisoning our water. Somebody's poisoning our water, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. And now that song is kind of like the anthem of the movement all across this country, and you can use it in different ways. Somebody's killing our children. Somebody's taking our health care. And it's gone on what? And it's gone on what? And it's gone on what? And we won't be silent anymore. Pope Francis has diagnosed the moral crisis of our time as a divide in the human family, which is exacerbated by social and economic forces. And he lists these things: The concentration of income in the hands of a few has become a conspicuous trend in the global economy. He actually talks about neoliberalism and trickle-down economics as being two forms of evil. Black magic, they call it evil magic, that continue to hurt us all. He then says, people disregarded, number two, by our economies hardly interrupt the naive optimism of the trickle-down theory. Number three, poverty grows alongside developments in technology that could reduce mortality rates, while hunger increases alongside possibilities of food production at lower prices. This is a contradiction. The very time that we are developing technology that could save lives, more poor folk are dying. Number four, personal isolation and anonymity are far too commonplace amidst the plethora of social networks and communication. Number five, misery has become the norm for far too many who live in the midst of obscene opulence. That's why when people say to me, if we could just get back, no. We could just get back to pre-COVID. No. COVID exposed how bad pre-COVID was. That's what COVID did. Number seven, the super rich arrogantly praise the market while governments are increasingly unable to impose regulations needed for the common good. In the context of this moral crisis, Pope Francis has made a global appeal with the encyclical Laudato Si to bring the whole human family together to seek sustainable and integral development. And actually, Laudato Si is written from the perspective of this question that is really the question that helps us understand where any society is, and that is, how are the children? That's the most penetrating question. How are the children? How are the children? In his call to care for our common home, he confronts neoliberalism and its economic theories. He contrasts communities with isolated individuals, integrated development, state society with the absolute rule of the market, solidarity, fellowship, and care for each other with hedonistic, consumerist, and profligate individualism. This is the Pope laying out. I'm going somewhere with this. He says we must articulate a way of thinking that brings together the complexity of the current situation and proposes an action strategy for the construction of a just society. Not only is democracy at stake, we are in this is my words, we are in a crisis of civilization. Not only is democracy at stake, but the well-being of the world is at stake. I often say to those who fight environmental justice, environmental concerns, you do know, as far as we know, this is the only planet we have we can live on. You do realize this is it. And if you don't take care of this, where do we go? He goes on to say, certain greedy oligarchs in society care only about money now and not death later. I come from a Christian tradition which says the love of money, now this is how my auntie said it, is the root. She didn't say root, she said is the root of all the evil, the love of it, right? He says they are pouring pornographic sums. Actually, this is things that I've been talking about, the pornographic sums of money into campaigns of strong men and strong women with the goal of creating government for profits, not for the people. And you have to watch this. Monday is what it's called Halloween, trick or treat. Take for instance the Supreme Court in this country. We think that that certain groups, extremists who call themselves Republican, appoint certain judges for where they will stand on abortion rights. That's what's the combination. And that's true to a certain degree. But watch what the Supreme Court did. They didn't so much end it, they threw it to the states and said each state now gets to vote on it. But the one thing that the Supreme Court justices that are appointed by extremists always do in full is give more power to corporations and block those who would protect the environment. Now, they don't talk about that, but that's their truest record. That's their 100% record. Every extremist Supreme Court justice that you see on the bench today, check their economic and environmental record. And you will find 100% voting to treat corporations like people and people like things. And we can't miss that. Too often that's left out of our public challenge to their appointments. I'm a bishop in the church, and I cannot go anywhere but reminding you that Jesus, the one whom I look to, in his first public proclamation, challenged elitism. He wasn't up there talking about personal sin and personal morality. His first sermon after 30 years, when he first opened his mouth, his first words challenged elitism and what's called the unjust stratification of Roman society. And he did it by giving a preeminent, prominent place to concern for the poor. That's his first word. First sermon, out the box. You want to know what I'm about? You may kill me in a couple of years, but here's what I'm about. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news, evangel, that's what evangelical means, good news, to preach good news to the poor. And the poor in that context is a word in Greek, ptokos, P-T-C-H-O-S, which means those who have been made poor by policy violence. Those who've been made poor by policy violence. And then from that, you have brokenheartedness and blindness and hurt. And then his last word was to declare the acceptable year of the Lord. And that's an ancient Jewish concept of Jubilee, when in the 50th year, everything is liberated. The land is liberated. The people are liberated. The slaves are liberated. Everybody, the stranger, everybody gets along. That's what's supposed to happen. And Jesus says, I'm proclaiming this kind of justice, full liberation of the land and of the people. And you should know that 20 minutes after he preached that first sermon, they tried to kill him. They tried to kill him, his own people. And you should know that when he preached that first sermon, he preached it in Nazareth. And Nazareth was the ghetto. Nazareth was where the poor were. Nazareth was a place that nobody expected anything good to come out of. But the poor in Nazareth had become bamboozled by the teachings of Caesar. So much so that even though they were poor and broken, they had bought into Caesar's way of thinking. So that when Jesus lifts up this concern for the poor and the least of these, the poor turn on him for a moment. Don't ever underestimate the power of those who shape the narrative. The poor turned on him. And it says, and they tried to throw him off the hill that day. And the second reason they tried to throw it off is because when he spoke, he said, and what I'm saying is not just for people who are like me, who he happened to be come out of, he's a Jew in Israel. He said, I've come to preach good news to the poor for everybody. Everybody. And at that point, he was targeted for the rest of the next 2.5 years for death. Because Caesar had set up a society that operated based on what we call the humidors and the honored ones. The humidors were the humiliated, the least of these from the bottom. The 1% in ancient Rome, they were called the honored one. Everything was done for them. The law, they didn't get the death penalty, they didn't get crucified. All the laws were skewed toward them. And the 99% had to do the best they could. And it was in that context where Cicero called working and called poor people the dregs of the city. It was in that context that Jesus came in and took on this Caesar Roman elite, oligarchic, violent society, and says that if you're going to build society, you must start from the bottom, and how those at the bottom are impacted. 55 years ago, so you hear what the Pope is doing, Jesus, 55 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., viewing the world and the cause of justice from a holistic and moral perspective, declared the need to simultaneously address three things. Anybody remember those three things? Racism, militarism, and poverty. Now, don't make the mistake to say he just came to that in 68, because in 1958, Dr. King in Montgomery preached a sermon called Paul's Letter to the American Christian, where he questioned the power of the 1% over the 99%. Also, don't forget that the March on Washington, which was originally the idea of A. Philip Randolph, who was a labor unionist, but the March on Washington had an agenda, and the agenda was not one person getting up singing, saying, I have a dream. In fact, that wasn't even the title of the speech. The title of the speech was Normalcy Never Again. I Have a Dream was a closing. It was like an ending. But the first 17 minutes was about the nightmare existence. The agenda for the March on Washington, does anybody happen to know what it was? The agenda for the March on Washington. You know what the first thing was? Who said jobs? Because the march was for jobs and freedom. That was the march. It wasn't a black march. It wasn't everybody sing Kumbala. It was a march for an agenda, because what were they challenging? They were challenging the way in which the Civil Rights Act was being gutted, because the goal of the movement would be a Civil Rights Act that would be an omnibus bill that would cover everything from voting rights to jobs to education, all of it. And it was being, by filibuster, it was being watered down. But the first agenda item was raise the minimum wage by 75% and index it with inflation. That was the first agenda. Now, think about how often when people are having marches on Washington and different things today, do you ever even hear that? The second was all able-bodied men and women would have a living wage job through a federal job program. The third was to expand the federal labor standard. The fourth was full funding of education. The fifth was voting rights. In other words, they wanted an omnibus bill. And remember, it was John Lewis on that day that stood up and said, while thousands of us are gathered here, we do not have anything to be proud of. This is John Lewis. For there are thousands of our brothers and sisters, black and white, poor, whom this bill will not impact their lives one bit, and it is not enough. So Dr. King said in 67, after he was looking at this book called The Other America, that there needed to be a poor people's campaign. But he didn't start it. It was the welfare rights women. Y'all hear what I'm saying? I constantly, because you know women weren't allowed to speak at the March on Washington, which is one of the great failures of it. Yeah. You know why they weren't allowed to speak? Because they said we can't control them. No, I mean, really. They said if we let Rosa Parks at that mic, if we let Prathia Hall at that mic, if we let Dorothy Height at that mic, they are not going to know. And so what they did was they did a brief introduction of Rosa, and they had, what's her name that sings, the white lady, Baez sing We Shall Overcome. And that's why Diane Nash didn't go. Diane Nash said, I'm not going, I'm going to Selma to start playing in the next move of the march. You know this stuff. And so in the welfare rights women said to Dr. King, we have to do two things. We gotta deal with poverty, and we have to deal with militarism because of the way it is eating up poor young men and women in war. And so Poor People's Campaign came together. Most of the civil rights movement didn't like it. They wrote articles against him. Did you know, and I'm going somewhere with this, it'll make sense in a minute. Did you know that when Dr. King stood at Riverside Church in 1968, 1967 and preached, it's time to break silence. And he called the country, America, the greatest portrayer of violence in the world at the time. Do you know that the next day there were 150 newspaper articles against him? He lost his invitation to the White House, and most civil rights organizations wrote resolutions against his position. And that by in December of 1967, when he was planning the Poor People's Campaign, the room looked different. It was Latinos and Native Americans and poor folk from all over that formed this coalition. And did you know he was killed exactly 1 year to the exact date that he said, I have to break silence. But he said, we've got civil rights, you must have human rights, and we need a Poor People's Campaign to unify poor people and moral leaders. He had said in 1965, at the end of the civil rights, the March from Selma to Montgomery, that the greatest fear of the oligarchy in this country is for the masses of poor Negroes and the masses of poor white people and the masses of other poor people to come together and form a voting bloc that can fundamentally reshape the economic architecture of the nation. That is the greatest fear, he said. And he said that we needed a movement that could combine empirically based criticism of systems with mass nonviolent civil disobedience to shock and revive the heart of society. But he was shot down. And his wife ended up delivering the speech, part of it that he was supposed to deliver when they had the gathering of the Poor People's Campaign. And she started out singing, "Come by here, my Lord, come by here." And Coretta began to lay out somebody asked her, what do you think about violence since your husband was murdered? She said, that's only one form of violence. She said, refusing to pay a person what they deserve is violence. Denying people health care is violence. Destroying the environment is violence. Taking people's culture away is violence. And then she said, and even an apathetic attitude that refuses to at least say no to these forms of violence is violence. Closing your mouth and refusing to at least speak truth, because one of the greatest things you can do in a time of lies is to speak truth. The most radical thing you can do, even if nothing changes, is to declare truth. So today, I wanted to mention these from the Pope, the Jesus, the King, and others. But today I join you as president of the Repairs of the Breach and co-founder of the Poor People's Campaign. And we've identified now 5 interlocking injustices. Write those down. 5 interlocking injustices that we believe you have to deal with simultaneously if you are serious about addressing the crisis of civilization. Now, and in these areas, you must always disaggregate the numbers based on race, based on geography, and based on gender. But here are the 5 areas. If we're serious about the common good and promoting the general welfare, we must address systemic racism and how that racism impacts black people, brown people, Asian people, Native people, and white people. We must address systemic poverty. We must address ecological devastation. We must address the war economy, and we must address the immoral narrative of extreme religious nationalism. And we cannot separate. In other words, we can have silos. I'm not saying everybody has to be under one movement or one organization. We can have our silos, but there are times we have to bring those silos together and understand that these 5 areas, or 6 areas, depending on how you combine them, are interlocking injustices. Interlocking injustices that require an interrelationship fusion moral coalition to address. For instance, you cannot find a politician that is anti-environmental justice that most often is not also anti-women's rights and anti-gay folk and anti-voting rights And so if they are cynical enough to be together, we got to be smart enough to come together and not always be in our silos. To address systemic racism, we must unpack the history of chattel slavery in America, sanctioned by the government that rendered individuals solely based on color as subhuman, not just as slaves, but as subhuman. And this was done to use their free labor to build an economy that today still impacts the whole world. Without chattel slavery, there would be no America. America would not be the richest nation in the world, and it would not have the imprint across the world. We must address systemic racism as a system rooted in white hegemony and white supremacist policies, not merely an interpersonal relationship issue. For instance, voter suppression is systemic racism. In our movement, we have found empirically that labor and the fight for labor rights cannot be disassociated from the fight for fundamental voting rights, because voter suppression allows people to get elected who are also anti-labor, anti-minimum wage, living wages. Every state in the United States that has policies of racialized voter suppression also has high poverty rates, low access to labor union, the most aggressive attacks on the LGBTQI community, the most aggressive attacks denying living wages, the most aggressive attacks against health care. All you have to ask is has this state passed voter suppression law? And if they've passed voter suppression law, the rest you can just believe that it's there. Anti-immigrants, all of it flows of systematic racism is used to divide black, white, brown, and yellow people who should be working together. Secondly, we got to address poverty. And we have to address poverty now today, my brothers and sisters, is not just a bad thing, but as a death thing. Not just as a bad, now who is, I wish, let's see how we can help the poor. No. Poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in America. Do you hear what I just said? Higher than respiratory disease. Higher than police violence. The fourth leading cause of death. 800 people a day prior to COVID dying from poverty. 250,000 people a year. 7 people died from vaping. And we had a White House conference. Everybody, 800 people die a day from poverty. 250,000 people a year in the richest nation in the world. 1 out of every 2 adults makes less than a living wage. 43% of America is poor and or low wealth. 51% of our children are poor and or low wealth. 60.9% of black people in America are poor and low wealth. That's 26 million people. 33% of white people are poor and low wealth. That's 66 million people. There are 40 million more poor and low wealth white people than there are black people in raw numbers. But percentage-wise, there's a 40% greater impact. We've not raised the minimum wage in 14 years. The minimum wage is $7.25 and $2.13 for those that work in the restaurant industry. And politicians will tell you that if you make $7.25 an hour, you are in the low middle class. Because the way they measure poverty, which is an outdated measurement from the 1960s, the day they declare that if you make $13,000 a year, you're not poor. 1/3 of all the poor people live in the South. 1/3 of all poor white people live in the South. Some of the greatest environmental destruction is going on in the South, and the majority of the politicians that are elected in the South are also anti-things that would help the environment and help the poor. And they are not there because the South is somehow red. The South is unorganized, and we still suffer from what's called the Southern strategy that was designed by Kevin Phillips and Richard Nixon and Pat Buchanan in the 1960s to engage in positive polarization. Y'all stop blaming Trump for all this stuff. He didn't start it. They developed this thing called positive polarization, and they said what we have to do is we have to find a way to intentionally divide black, white, and brown people. Because if they find a way to come together, not even all of them, just a percent, they can determine every electorate. And they said this: if we do this, this is actually in a book called The Time of Illusion. If we do this, it might get out of hand. We might end up producing a leader that's absolutely crazy. But then we're going to lie and say we didn't have nothing to do with it. They wrote that. Poverty. We have to address poverty as a human scandal, not a divine necessity. I have to challenge the church a lot of times when folk want to say, well, didn't Jesus say the poor will be with you always? Read the whole text. Read what actually he was quoting from in Deuteronomy. The poor will be with you always because you robbed them, because you charge usury in interest. But the prophet said that a society is judged by how it protects the rights of the poor. In fact, one scripture, Isaiah 10, said, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right. Thirdly, we must address ecological devastation. And especially for me, theologically. See, I have to address ecological devastation because theologically and morally, from a Christian perspective and from the Hebrew Bible perspective, it says that humankind was given dominion. Dominion in that text does not mean domination and destruction. It means to care for. The original Hebrew word means to care for. To care for. Truth of the matter, however you look at it, mythology or just a story, Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden for ecological devastation, messing up something they had no business bothering. Y'all with me? In my faith tradition, and that's honored by Muslims and Christians, because a lot of the scriptures are honored by Muslims, Christians, and Jews, and the earth is the Lord, and the fullness thereof means take care of it. Doesn't mean destroy it. But the number of storms and natural diseases are increasing. And the Roosevelt Institute, for instance, notes that the areas with the highest level of poverty make the greatest impact on ecological devastation. And we cannot walk away from it. Sometimes when I'm in groups, I say, how can you walk away from the fact that 4 to 5 million people get up every morning and can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water? Not just in Flint, not just in Jackson, but all over this country. And then we must address the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower, who was a Republican, when he was no longer running for office, warned this country about what he called, now, some people call it the military-industrial complex. He said it was the congressional military-industrial complex. He said we must be aware of it, because not only will it take what it can get, not only will it foster wars just to be funded, but it will also create heavy ecological devastation. And here we are in America. Today, 54 cents of every discretionary dollar goes toward the military-industrial complex, and not so much to help soldiers who are committing suicide, need health care, but to fund those that build weaponry. One military contract to one military corporation could pay for all the health care we need for all the people in this country. There's a certain level of obscenity and a certain level of suicidal complex when a nation allows itself to spend more on weaponry and blowing up the world than it does on saving the world. It's almost like a built-in destruction. And then finally, we have to have a public morality that challenges this distorted extreme religious nationalism. Because what religious nationalism does is it tries to say God is on the side of greed. God is on the side of meanness and hate and distortion. The cross, if you will, it bows to the flag. The religion is no longer critic of the state. It becomes the chaplain of the state no matter what. It becomes protector of the state no matter what. And there is a reduction where faith is not used and theology is not used to challenge public policy. Instead, it is used to primarily talk about personal issues and personal realities rather than deal with real sin. You know what the greatest sin in Scripture is? Y'all say, I ain't come here for Bible study. Well, you invited me. Don't invite a preacher and don't ask him to talk. Because I don't want y'all to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I understand a lot of my liberal brothers and sisters, y'all got so mad with Jerry Falwell and them, y'all threw it all out. But there's a book that's called, I think an article that says, The Church Before We Messed It Up. And the point, Jesus before we messed him up. But here's the point. However you look at it, in the scriptures, the Bible at least, there are over 2,000 scriptures that relate to how we treat the least of these. The number one sin in the Bible is idolatry, self-worship. The number two sin is the mistreatment of women, children, and the poor. And if you cut all of those scriptures out of any Bible, it falls apart. That's the first thing I do in my classes at divinity school. The first class they take when they come in, I come in with a cellophane bag full of cut out scriptures and a Bible that they came from. And I put it on the table and say, if you're not dealing with public policy and public theology and addressing issues that relate to the poor and how we treat the least of these, then you are actually preaching from a cut-up Bible. A cut-up Bible. The same thing was done during slavery. The slave masters created a slave Bible. They went in with charcoal and put charcoal over all the scriptures that had to deal with liberation in order to uphold somehow in an immoral way the system of slavery. These 5 areas must be addressed within the context of a movement, both in the United States and around the world. We have to challenge interlocking injustice with an intersectional approach. It is an ecology of the society that dares to see anti-racism, anti-poverty, pro-justice, living wages, labor rights, environmental and ecological justice, educational equity, critique warmongering, fair immigrant laws, universal health care as a human right, voting rights, and access to the ballot as one movement. One movement. Just like the air we breathe. We breathe from one air. And our response in this that I'm working with is to build a Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I come this morning to invite you in. I'm not inviting you into another organization. You've got enough organizations. We don't need another organization. I'm through. But what we do need is a movement in this moment, when civilization. We need a movement where we come together, and on March the 2nd, we are going to gather. During COVID, we had to do some things differently. Last year, we had a mass poor people, low-wage workers, moral march on Washington to the poll. Thousands of people showed up, millions online, but it was still during COVID. But this coming year, on March the 2nd, 35 weeks before the election, we're going to have in 30 states simultaneous gatherings at state capitals, pushing this agenda, pushing a third Reconstruction agenda, demanding in state capitals that and we're doing it to dramatize. It's going to be led with the poor, not for the poor. Poor people, advocates, moral and religious leaders, and agenda-based and issue-based. And we're going to begin to mobilize the 80 million poor and low-wealth people in this country who are poor and or low wealth that are eligible to vote. 80 million. There are 60 million registered, 50 million voted. The data now tells us that poor folk represent 33% of the electorate in most states and over 40% in battleground states. And there's not a state in this country, if 20% of low-income, poor voters were to vote that have not voted, they could not determine the election. And the number one reason, according to a study we did with Columbia University and some others, that poor and low-wealth people don't vote is because nobody talks to them. Politicians from Senate to the House to the presidency they don't have to ask when they do debates, where do you stand on poverty? Where do you stand on living wages? Instead, we get caught up in these deflection issues. Where do you stand on black history? Where do you stand on gay rights? Where do you stand on women's rights? And they use these issues to not have to address other issues, because most of the folk that linger in those areas and say, vote for me because I'm against gay folk, vote for me because I'm against women's rights, vote for me because I'm against black history, I'm against wokeism. Most of them are failed politicians, because if you ask them, where have you stood on issues of poverty and health care and living wages and voting rights, they don't want to talk about it. They do not want folk to know. And we cannot, as I told somebody the other day, you can't get all upset over somebody saying they're going to block black history, and you're in the street for that, but you're not in the street when they're blocking living wages and people are dying like crazy in that state. And so I'm calling, asking you. We want a simultaneous gap of at least 1,000. And then on June 15th at the nation's capital, we're going to call for a second mass poor people's low-wage workers assembly and march on Washington, led by poor folk, not just the march, but an agenda. And to say, we are mobilizing votes, but you need to understand, our votes are a demand. Our votes are a demand. They come with an agenda. We're not doing it way down in August after the convention, but before the convention. We're not doing it when the Congress is not in session, but while they're in session. And we're calling for this mass conscience building gathering to call people. And then we're going to work to mobilize 10 to 15 million poor and low-wage workers and voters. Because did you know in Michigan, for instance, if just 1% of poor and low-wealth voters voted, they could determine that 1% of poor and low-wealth voters who did not vote is greater than the margin of victory in the last elections in Michigan. In North Carolina, it's 19%. In Georgia, it's 7%. South Carolina is 12%. Mississippi is 18.9%. Poor and low-wealth voters, the people that are impacted the most by ecological devastation and whatnot, we are in a moment, yes, it's tough, yes, it's bad, but we are in a moment where the stones that the builders rejected now have a power that they have not had before. And the question is, will we move together? Because until our moral narrative is shifted, the agenda of our society will be limited and uninformed. Now you say, Reverend Barber, where you get this from, that we need to have a meeting like this? Well, the Bible. And I get it from a text that many of you who may not even claim to be people of faith, you have actually said it. You remember when Dr. King said, until justice rolls down like water. Y'all ever heard that? Until justice rolls down like waters. And what? Righteousness not. You don't even have to go to Bible study to know that. Everybody knows that. Right. Well, he was quoting from Amos chapter 5. Now, can I read Amos chapter 5? Would y'all mind if I read that? Amos chapter 5. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Amos chapter, but I want to read it in the Message Bible. And some of y'all going to start reading your Bible after this. You're going to say, I didn't know that was in the Bible. Even if it's nothing but literature, you're going to go pick up a Bible and say, Lord, Reverend Barber showed me. I didn't know. I thought if all the Bible didn't want me to do was smoke. I didn't know. I didn't thought. All right. Listen to this. A time of great upheaval in the world. This is what the prophet says. Seek good and not evil and live. Injustice is epidemic and it's hurting people. Now, you want to talk about God all the time? You want to talk about God? You want to talk about in God we trust? Well, act like it. Live like it. How? Hate evil and love good. Hate injustice. And work it out in the public square. And then maybe this God you claim you trust might notice. But what we need is a remnant of people. We don't need everybody. A remnant of people that will have a meeting. And the meeting needs to be in the street. This is what God said. Go out into the street. Go get the remnant. Go get the broken. Go get the people that other folk disregard. And go into the street with them and cry just as loud as you can. Let them see your tears. Make them have to see you. Make it so they can't ignore you. And I want you to fill up the malls. I want you to fill up the shop. I want you to fill it up with cries of doom. I want you to cry and say, something's wrong here. We're broken. We're in a crisis. I need you to weep so loud. I need you to weep. And when you're weeping, say this, not on our watch. This is actually in the Bible, y'all. Not on our watch. Not us. Not now. You will not get away with this now. And I need you to empty the offices and empty the factories and empty the workplaces. I need everybody that believes in justice, that remnant, to have a meeting, and I need you to engage in a general lament because I want to hear. God says, I want to hear you cry. I want to know you just as fed up as I am.
I want to know that you are concerned about what's going on. I want to know that you've not lost your heart and you've not lost your compassion. And if you act like you know this is not right, then I'll come help you. I don't want any more religious meetings on the side. I don't want any more religious songs. I don't want to hear all that. It's nothing but noise. It's nothing but useless noise unless you become a part of justice rolling down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. If we desire change, my brothers and sisters, there must be a meeting. And it must be a coming together, whether you're in environmental issues or labor issues, a remnant of the people who dare to see that the struggle for our common humanity is a necessity. We need the people who understand why you have lived through COVID. It's not because you're so good. I wrestled with this hard one night when one of the people in our movement lost 21 members of their family in a 30-mile radius in a state that would not get health care. 320,000 people died during COVID, not from COVID, but from the lack of health care. And then another family lost 38 members of their family in a 40-mile radius, where they've closed all the hospitals within 70 miles because of the state's refusal to expand health care. And one night, I was wrestling with that, and I said, why am I still alive, God? I'm not no better than those people. It's not that I'm so good. Why in the world am I still here? I have immune deficiencies. I know I've been around COVID. Why am I still alive? And way over in the night, what happened to me that happened to Howard Thurman, the muse of the Spirit woke me up and said, that is always the wrong question. Always the wrong question. You can't answer that question. Why are you still alive? Why you didn't die at childbirth? Why? You can't answer that question. But the question always is, what are you going to do with your life? Because the truth of the matter is, all of us got 6 minutes. Any one of us in here stop breathing for 6 minutes, unless something really, really happens, it's probably over. And I'm not talking about 6 minutes Dougie Fresh on the dance floor. I'm talking about 6 minutes. And the question is, what are you going to do with your 6 minutes, your 6 hours, your 6 days, your 6 weeks, your 6 months, your 6 years, or your 60 years? And I suggest that it is a waste of breath to hate. It's a waste of breath to hurt. It's a waste of breath to be apathetic. It's a waste of breath not to be concerned about justice. And the best thing you can do with your 6 minutes is be engaged with whatever time you have. Because there are some things that transcend political majorities, transcends partisan politics and narrow categories of liberal versus conservative. There are some things that have to be challenged because they're wrong, they're extreme, they're immoral. Destroying the earth is just wrong, y'all. Poverty and hurting poor folk is just wrong. Treating corporations like people and people like things is just wrong. Trying to take people's voting right, which is not something you get from the democracy, it's something you get with your creation. You were made to make choices. You were made to vote. Your mind works like that. You started when you were a kid, when you chose not to go get them cookies mama told you not to have, or to go get those cookies. You were born to vote. And some things are just wrong. It's just wrong to hate people because of their gender, their sexuality. It's just wrong, y'all. It's just wrong that in a nation that spends more on health care than any other, not that everybody doesn't have health care, and that politicians get free health care just because they get elected, and then once they get elected, they block other people from getting what they get for free. It's just wrong. Something that had nothing to do with Democrat versus Republican. It's just wrong. And so, as my grandmama said, it's time to dig a little deeper in your soul. It's time to say we're in a crisis of civilization, but if it was made this way, it can be unmade. If it was created by extremists, it can be uncreated by those of us who believe in love and justice and mercy. It's time to steady your spine. Don't go around here talking about you tired of fighting. You haven't been through slavery. What do you mean tired? There were people who faced the worst than we faced. They didn't quit. And if they did quit, they got up again. Somebody went to an action one day and said, I'm tired of this. How many actions have you been to? 2. Well, do you know the Montgomery movement lasted 381 days? They had mass meetings for 381 days. They stayed off the buses for 381 days. They faced bomb threats for 381 days. How dare us do more? We got more than they had. How dare us do more with more, and they did more with less. Steady your spine. I ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. And I often think about the challenge when I was born, August 30th, 1963, 2 days after the March on Washington. Bayard Rustin, who was gay, openly gay, organized the March on Washington in the face of the president's opposition, vicious racists, didn't want him to march. Some in his own community didn't believe we could make a difference. Despite all the odds, they came together. They launched not only a march, but a movement. Fusion politics took place in America 2 days before I was born, August 28, 1963. In fact, the joke in my family was my mama went into labor on the 28th, and I said, wait, hold. Let's see how this thing turned out. Let's see, because they got the troops outside of D.C. You know they had the troops outside of D.C. in just in case something broke happened. And they came together, not just to hear one man. Because if you remember, Dr. King said, go back. Don't stay here in D.C. Don't have one march. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back knowing that your efforts will not be in vain. 17 days later, 4 girls were blown up in a Birmingham church, but they didn't quit. When they blew those girls up, young folk didn't go kill 4 girls in their play. They didn't go find 4 white girls and kill them. They started saying, you killed them, now we coming. Can't kill us all. And they came to the South in droves. We got to understand that there comes a time when the stones that the builders rejected become the chief cornerstone. Let me be pastor a minute. I know in this room, some of you have been rejected because of your sexuality. Some of you have been rejected because of who you love. Some of you have been rejected because of how you were born. Some of you have been rejected because of your poverty. Some of you rejected because some people need to feel good about themselves, so they beat up on you. There are folk in this room right here that have known rejection. Rejection because of income, rejection because of status, rejection because of the lack of faith or because of faith. Rejection because somebody decided in their own sick ideology that they had a right, a false mandate to demean your humanity. But I want you to know that when the rejected come together, the rejected can transform a society. The rejected, us, can become the cornerstones of a new reality. The rejected. And so when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latino, join hands of progressives, join white hands, join faith hands, join labor hands, join Asian hands, join Native American hands, join hands that are in places of great ecological devastation, join wealthy hands with a conscience, join gay hands, join trans hands, join straight hands. When we all join hands together, we can have a meeting that will change this world. When we join hands together, and together, we can build something that the world cannot do without. Like H2O, you know, too much hydrogen will kill you, too much oxygen, raw oxygen, pure oxygen will kill you. But if you mix it right, you come up with something called water that nobody can deal without. But the only way that happens is there has to be a meeting between the hydrogen and the oxygen. Now is the time for an ecology of unity and coming together, for the rejected to come together in a sustained way to say, we will not accept things the way they are. And if we do, history will record that in the 21st century, in the first third of the 21st century, folk of all different places came together and they stopped the meanness and the madness, and they introduced to the world a new time of love and morality. And guess what? even if they don't listen. I'd rather die trying than to live not being unified with you, and to live silent. It's gone on far too long. And we can't be silent anymore. Let's have a meeting.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Let's take a seat.
You gonna have a sit for a second?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are only actually about 10 minutes after we were supposed to be. We were going to try to end a little earlier, but we were going to start this session next, and Reverend Barber may particularly appreciate this part. I think Ryan, every session we've had here has started with a spiritual reflection.
Oh.
This is a conference about environmental joy. And so Ryan was going to suggest something that we turn to each other a little bit. We've just been inspired even more. Ryan was going to suggest something to reflect that part of our work. And then each of the tracks, we're going to report out for about 10 minutes. Let's try to make that 5 minutes because we did a lot of work here. Some of you may have to leave. It's okay. We got rapporteurs here to write up everything. So you'll get the report outs. But I think it'd be good for us to hear the work we've done. And then Xiye Bastida, can you raise your hand? In the back, who's an amazing indigenous leader from Mexico and New York at the same time, is going to give us her reflections on what she's heard of our work. And I think we may just go a little shorter in terms of a lot of back and forth and try to do that and make sure we hear what each of the tracks we've been working so hard have done and try to wrap up by 1:30 like we were supposed to have. Is that all right with everyone? All right, thank you. Who wants to go? Michael, can I have you go first, Michael? Sure. Yeah, okay. All right. All right. The tracks are going to report out. Please name your tracks. And I think what we'll do is there's going to be a brief report out. There might be a little shout out from people who've been on those tracks who have other observations, and then we'll move to this next track and the next track. There are people keeping track of this whole conversation, and we're going to have reports written out of the conference as well based on the work you all have done. So thank you all for staying and doing this. And I'm going to start with Michael, and we'll go to Bruni. About 3 minutes. Michael, Bruni. Nidhi, a lot of Zoom calls. Asia, and I'm sorry, you're Liz. That's right, Liz. Okay, so we're gonna go down this way and back to you, Liz, at the end. Okay.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Michael.
Great. I was about to say good morning, but good afternoon, everyone. Mike Méndez, University of California, Irvine. So I was the track lead for the policy session, and I had a fabulous and joyful counterpart, Christine Correro from APIN. And we covered a lot of things, but the biggest issue was this idea of community, building community, and that any policymaking process, people, a sense of community had to be centered. And then understanding that process is important. And then once you center people, have a people-centered approach to climate change and environmental justice issues, then you can truly experience this overwhelming sense and collective sense of joy. But at the same time, understanding that joy itself is contextual, and it means very different things to different communities, different people, different identities. And I was really left with sort of this idea of community, but the idea of comunitas, which takes from cultural anthropology. And they defined it as an overview, outlining the concept of comunitas as an overview in relationship to the natural history of joy, including the nature of human experience and its narration, festivals, music and sports, work, disaster, the sacred, revolution and nonviolence, nature and spirit, and the ritual and rites of passage. So that it's this undescribable collective sense of joy of people coming together, either through a sacred rite, through disaster and injustice, but people having a common sense. And I think coming from this conference, this is a form of comunitas. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Beautiful. Bruni?
Hi, everyone. Bruni Pizarro for La Diáspora. So I was a presenter, and I have the honor now of being a track lead reporter, right? So the track is the evaluation track. It's migration, displacement, climate displacement, and joy. And what we spoke about in general was different methods of narratives, like how do we start really thinking about rooting these stories in justice, in narratives of like the quotidian, the day-to-day, everyday life, of strength, of vitality, of conviviality, and really creating those safe spaces where whether it's through a conversation, whether it's an amazing barn for new arrivals in Vermont, as Mark shared, thinking about Colombia as well, and the spaces that worked and didn't work there. And then in the case of New Haven, Connecticut, thinking about the transnational experience of climate migrants from Puerto Rico who came here looking for a better opportunity when they didn't see it there after all the disasters that happened in Puerto Rico. There weren't just climate change disaster that predated the hurricanes in Puerto Rico. So really thinking about space. And then in terms of joy, I think a big theme there was thinking about how do we get to joy, right? If we're dealing with so much of trauma, how are we unpacking this trauma? And that's we're like when you're en route to joy, the healing part, and that dialectical conversation between trauma, hope, and joy. Well, really trauma and joy, right? En route. And so those are the main themes, really the human experience, the human condition, and its complexities.
Thank you. I was sat in on your last session, and Bruni sat at the front and read from a journal article, a law review article, a quote from a woman, and as she was playing, Bruni, because she's a designer, also put the El Coquí in Puerto Rico up, and stars, a starry night, and she talked about how a woman there was no power in her town, but was reflecting on how every night she heard these things that had been around her whole life, but she could only hear now there was no energy in her city. It was a beautiful image of the suffering and the joy at the same time, and she gave us a soundtrack too. Thank you, Bruni. It was beautiful. Really beautiful. Yeah. Well, let's post it. Let's try to post it out to people. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't sleep, you put that on, you're good.
Yeah. Nidhi, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Hi, Nidhi Menon from Imagination, and I had the honor of leading the economics track where we spoke about water security and mutual aid. We had 3 fantastic speakers. Dr. Kimberly Milligan, she spoke to her experience in the Delaware State Water Quality Lab and the Hemp Analysis Lab, and she found joy in giving back to her community and empowering brown and black students to become the future of science and in entrepreneurship. Next, we had Reverend Michael Malcolm, the executive director of the Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. And he spoke to the power of community. And he said, in the face of disasters, there is joy in seeing a community pooling their resources together and taking action. Luis Kakish, the senior water advisor at USAID, he really showcased what the water sector looks like in Jordan, and things that brought him joy was his work with the USAID, where they're now able to give 95% of people access to clean drinking water, which is an awesome thing, and that happened through his work. And so I have a couple of notes. I'm going to go over them quick, but from group discussions, the biggest things that came out were community building and engagement, being purposeful about creating communities in the environmental field, moving beyond helplessness to an I can do something with others and receive inspiration from others and the natural world, returning land to itself and promoting ecological solutions, and giving people voice, bringing in historically disenfranchised points of view, and integrating and involving refugees into proactively creating solutions. And 5 words that I saw come out most from the discussions were community, interconnectedness, advocacy, humanity, and equity. Thank you.
Very much. Asia DeCoteau. Asia. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Asia DeCoteau. I am a YSE grad. I'm also on the Council for the Yale Center for Environmental Justice. I serve as the Executive Director for the Columbia River Intertribal Fisheries Commission, which is located out of Portland, Oregon. And I'm also a citizen of the Yakama Nation, and I'm also Cayuse, Nez Perce, and Turtle Mountain Chippewa. I was very honored to lead the track on governance titled Grounded Joy, Sovereignty, Land Tenure, Carbon, and the Sacred. I'd really like to do shout outs and thanks to our amazing panelists, Patrick Gonzalez-Rogers for his work on tribal sovereignty, co-management, and countering historical trauma by being present. To Radiatu Sharif Kaplaya, her work in Liberia to amplify voices of women affected by the impact of large-scale investment. And finally, to Eleanor Thompson, her legal work in Sierra Leone to create positive law reform to create equitable and democratic frameworks for decision-making on the land. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and joy through this process. So our panel really spoke to the indigenous cultures across the world who hold thousands of years of observations and adaptations and traditional knowledges of their homelands. Where I'm from, on the Columbia Plateau, we refer to this wisdom as Tumunwit. That's our word for it. It means the original natural law that governs the balance of life on Earth. It's a spiritual philosophy rooted in the reciprocal and life-giving relationship between human beings and the natural world around them. Understanding Tumunwit not only provides a sustainable relationship with nature, but also strengthens our bond to one another as community. And I think at the heart of this discussion is really about the joy we find in that community and the interconnectedness that was spoken about earlier. So there were a lot of, it was great discussions and themes that came out from the past three panels, and I'm just gonna read through them because I think they're so good. So, and I'm gonna say joy a lot, just giving you a heads up. We find joy in gratitude and love and passion, joy in centering and being intentional, in our identity, our culture, our tribes, our geography, our ceremonies, our language, our families. We find joy in sharing that culture, in telling our story, in community and family and bringing people together, in taking care of ourselves so we can continue to do our work to sustain our inner joy. Joy in the connection to land, water, medicinal plants, fish, I'm a fish person, wildlife. Joy in creativity and innovation. Joy in diversity of thought, knowledge, and elevating our voices, in consensus, in celebrating our victories and our losses, in being face to face with one another, in sacredness, in power, in women, in indigenous women, in indigenous ecological knowledge and the reciprocity that comes with that. The joy to live and care for the land, interacting with the land, sustaining it for future generations, and having the decision-making power to decide what happens on those lands. Joy in sovereignty, joy in rights without restrictions, joy the power to manage not just the land, but our cultural resources. Joy in the abundance of water, food, fish, and wildlife, in our existence on Earth, in spirituality, culture, traditions, for our life givers, our women, in understanding the seasons of abundance for these things, in our worldview, our power, our knowledge. And as Gerald said earlier, joy in taking agency to create the world we want. Joy in the inclusivity and the power to make decisions, be at the decision-making table, and continue to fight to get there. And finally, joy in the acknowledgement of the people who came before us, those who paved the way for us to be here today, the joy they experienced, the sacrifices they made, how that impacts our work, our joy, and the decisions we make today, and how those decisions will impact our future generations and the joy they have yet to experience. That's all. Thank you. Katsiaya.
The slide up there just is an example of some of the work behind the scenes. The evaluation group put that together as their report out. I know Sugdeo couldn't stay to explain it to us, but we'll be interpreting it, and the reporters will make sure it gets into our report. Liz, you're last but not least.
Thank you so much.
Or did you want to add something?
After Liz.
Okay, go ahead, Liz.
Thank you so much. So I was on the Caribbean track as one of the presenters, the executive director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, along with Dr. David Farrell, who's the principal of the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. And our track was facilitated by Mr. Clinton White, who unfortunately is not able to be here today, so he asked me to sit in for him. So the presentations really explore the concept of joy in disaster risk management through the work of SEDEMA and within the scientific and technical work of the Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. We talked a lot about the dimensions of joy, and specifically exploring joy in the context of small island developing states, which face the existential threat of climate change, contributing less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but suffering the brunt of the impacts. We also discussed how joy was influenced by perspective and how we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as small island states or big ocean states? And that joy is not determined by small size, but rather we find joy through our requirement to think big to overcome the challenges that we face. We also talked about the importance of finding or rediscovering joy in the face of adversity, of the disasters that we face, both at the personal and the community level, and that there are regional, national, and community aspects of joy that need to be explored. Very importantly, we felt that finding joy by helping the next generation to discover, appreciate, and preserve the environment, and especially through environmental mentorship, was something that was going to be very key. We did talk also about the sorrow side of things, from rapid environmental change in the Caribbean space and losses that we're seeing, and also from the negative social impacts as well. We also touched a little bit on some of the principles or lessons that were emerging, and we agreed that the environment in itself is a source of joy in our Caribbean states, the importance of keeping people at the center, and that to generate joy, we as small states have to make the best use of what we have through working together and coordinating also with our partners. We also touched on this side of culture, particularly at the community level, and how culture is leveraged and social capital is leveraged in the aftermath of events to assist persons in the Caribbean in coming through really difficult situations in the aftermath of catastrophic impacts, and that robust social capital means that joy can organically emerge at the community level and is informed also by cultural practices. And we talked quite a bit on celebrating successes and achievements, even in the context of having limited human capital and physical resources as well. So some of the sort of risks that we identified is that, disasters fundamentally bring sorrow through damage and loss. And do we really have a common understanding of joy in the discipline that we're working on? And how do we measure joy in the work? We then concluded by really talking about the importance of centering joy in the work because it brings hope. And we made some specific recommendations about, steps that could be taken for integration through creating spaces for innovation and creative thinking, charting your own path through homegrown strategies, as well as delivering joy through engagement of youth. And finally, we really emphasized the point of joy through showing care and love to other people. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Reverend Barber, please, go ahead.
It's just powerful to hear what I'm hearing, and I just wanted to add a couple of things. One of the great teachings that comes up out of the slave freedom movement is how you can sing sorrow and joy in the same song. One of the great songs is "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen," but then it ends, "Glory, glory, hallelujah." And there's a way of acknowledging that both are real. The suffering is real, but the prophetic imagination, and then secondly, that prophetic imagination must always precede prophetic implementation. That there's a sense in which you have to have the prophets in the Bible had 3 jobs, and we in some sense are the prophets of our age. One was to clearly announce how bad it was. Number 2, to announce what would happen if you don't change it. But number 3 was also to give a word of hope and joy. So when I keep the stone that the builders rejected, I wanted to add, I didn't say it, go read Psalm 118 because it's a part of what's called the Hallel Psalms.
that's where you find the stone that the builders was rejected have become the chief cornerstone. And then it says, and this is the day the Lord has made. In other words, when you start seeing people to come together, even before the coming together changes the reality, shout right there at the coming together, because the coming together is a sign of something greater than you pulling you together in that moment, whether it be the suffering or whatever it is. And then lastly, I know your sister's coming up, I think, at the end. I didn't do it because I didn't know now I know it would have been welcome. I was trying to be in order. I should have just went on and did what I felt like doing. But there's this song I wanted you all to hear for this conference, right? And I've heard it in all of you all. And it's real quick, take a minute. It's a song, it says, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that you know what I'm talking about, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take it away. This joy that I have, the haters didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the haters didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the hate, and the world can't take it away. And if I was at home in the church, I'd say, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this joy I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, Lord, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world didn't give it. The world can't take it away. This joy that I have, the haters, don't you know now this joy that I have, the haters didn't give it to me. One more time. This joy that I have, the haters didn't give it to me. The haters didn't give it. The haters can't take it away. And y'all can fill in that wherever you are. Just sometimes when you at the city council meeting and they acting up, you just start singing that. This joy that I have, the council didn't give it to me. Oh, this joy that I have, the council didn't give it to me. That's why I'm going to fight y'all. This joy that I have, the council didn't give it to me, and the council didn't give it. The council can't take it away.
All right. So prophetic implementation, right? Prophetic implementation. I don't want to be the last voice you hear. So our respondent, I'm giving her a couple minutes to gather her thought. I'll introduce her in a minute, Xiye Bastida. I want to start by one announcement. Our career services office is excellent at this school and has agreed to do a career services session on environmental justice careers and environmental careers. There's lunch for anyone who comes. It starts right after this in Bowers, in that brown building over there, and we have a really smart person who runs that office, and many of the professionals who've come to the conference are sitting in to give career advice as well to those of you who want to come to that. We want a round of thanks. Could everybody stand up for a second? Let's stretch for a second. We're almost done here. Stand up. There's some people here. I'm only going to name a few people. I want to start with our planning committee who worked on this so tirelessly. Lauren Maxwell, who facilitated both a large indigenous presence at this conference and Reverend Barber's arrival. Thank you, Lauren. Big hand of applause for Lauren, please. Ryan at the Institute for Sacred Music, and we're standing over here, who's led us through the sacred process of this Joy Conference. Thank you. I'm sure you didn't generate all the tears, but you sure helped them come out with everything, your whole team. Thank you all very much. Let's give them a round of applause. There are a lot of volunteers I cannot acknowledge, and our students at YSC and from around the campus, undergrads and grad students, please give them a round of applause. Incredible dedication. The scholarship team and a bunch of other folks who made sure everybody could get here. My colleague, the program director, program manager Kristen Barendrecht-Ludwig over there, who's done this conference for 6 years in a row and is incredibly organized and together. I love working with Gerald Torres. I love working with Gerald Torres so much. I'm so happy to be here. And finally, she's not in the room. Julie, are you in the room? Where are you? Please come up here. Are you here? No, she's not here. So this is, can you catch her and tell her, you know, I'm not going to say her age or anything, but some people don't know you got to be there when people thank you. Like, you have to hear it. You have to stand in front of a crowd and absorb the love that all of you all, I'm sure, share for Julia, who helped us pull this program together. I texted her already. I told her to get in the room. She hasn't come, so catch her on the way out. Julia, let's put up a round of applause for Julia Simon, who put this program together with us. Thank you. All right, and with that, I'd like to introduce the person who's going to close us out, Xiye Bastida, and if we're blessed, perhaps Reverend Barber will start us with a new song to walk out of here when that's all done. Xiye, come on up. Xiye is an amazing climate justice activist from the, and thank you to the track leads. Hello. They didn't get to go to any other sessions but their own, and we're on so many planning calls. Amazing, amazing people. Thank you so much. Thank you. And there's so much, I know I've forgotten somebody, but we all thank you to everybody. All right. So Xiye Bastida is a climate justice activist from the Otomi Toltec indigenous community located in Central America. She lives in New York and Pennsylvania right now, and it's just we're so blessed to have her. I'm going to stop at that and let her show you. And we've asked her to respond to what she's heard in this conference and close us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, amazing. So it's an honor to be here, most of all because this feels like a space of healing. And I think we need so much more of that, more healing in the climate movement. So I want to acknowledge that all of us healed a little more from the things that are going on in the world. And that is something that we're mimicking from Mother Earth, because Mother Earth regenerates. Mother Earth is always, always working to sew the wounds. And so I'm going to just introduce myself briefly, and then I'll give some thoughts on what I've seen today, which all of you could come up here and say your thoughts of today, and I hope that you do when you go back to where you come from. So my name is Xiye Bastida. I come from the Otomi Toltec indigenous community in central Mexico. My name, Xiye, means soft rain in Ñañu, which is our language. And my parents met in the 1992 Earth Summit. So I've been a climate activist 10 years before I was born. And obviously before that, because my ancestors have been stewarding Mother Earth for centuries. I want to start by saying that when I thought of joy first, I thought of the word enjoy, and how we need to enjoy things in order for that joy to be produced. In Spanish, the word for enjoy is disfrutar. And the word that you can distill from that is fruit, which is fruitful. So joy has to be fruitful. It has to create something that we can indulge in, that is concrete, but it can also be just a feeling. And so those are some of the linguistic gymnastics that I'm trying to do, because I want to get to the point of how our knowledge is so, indigenous knowledge is so necessary for these spaces. In my language, the word for the skin is the same as the word for the outer layer of the earth. When you hurt Mother Earth, you hurt yourself. When you nourish the earth, you nourish yourself, and vice versa. And another reason why we need all of this diversity in the climate space is something that both Reverend and Lila referenced to, which Lila said in her closing song, "This is a war, but we've seen it all before." What does that mean? It means that we have seen genocide, we have seen slavery, we have seen colonization. The climate crisis is not the first crisis of our communities. So we need to stop talking about the climate crisis as something that is coming. We need to start talking about the climate crisis as the place where our skills of resilience and survival come into place, because our communities have been rebuilding already from the wounds of the past. And once we understand that the most marginalized in the world are rebuilding our tissues of society every single day, we can then understand that the climate crisis is about remediating things, not stopping something from coming. And when you think of the climate crisis as something that we have to remediate and heal, then we can go to the roots. I heard a quote from somebody somewhere. And she said, "The river that forgets its roots will soon dry out." The river that forgets its roots will soon dry out. If we forget, and then you're going to repeat that someday somewhere.
I heard the Lord say.
And so we must remember our roots always. And we need to remember that our current society is about derooting us and stripping us from where we come from and who we are as people of the earth. A lot of the times, indigenous peoples, we have to feel that we need to give non-indigenous peoples permission to, we never feel this way, but we feel that people feel this way. Permission to be grateful to Mother Earth, permission to give an offering, permission to say thank you. And so I want to say this once and for all, we all have to have that relationship with the earth. We all have to give back. Practice reciprocity is very simple, actually. You can go outside, grab a leaf that has fallen, put an intention into it, and give it back to the earth. Everywhere you go, what are you doing to give back to the place, the land that is holding you? Every breath that we take, every bite that we've ever taken, every step that we've ever taken is only possible because of Mother Earth. And so we're connected every single second that we are on this planet to the past and the future. And I don't want to go on too long because I could really talk about anything for as long as you'll have me up here. I want to say that our homework is to be channels of joy in this world where joy is so difficult. Our homework is to be channels of clarity in this world that gets everything so mixed up. That is the essence of the climate justice community, is to be channels of the things that we want to create in the future. Remember that every single thing that exists today was imagined. It was a thought, it was a feeling, and then it was created. If we give ourselves the homework to think beautifully, only beautiful things can come out of that. We have to go back to the very essence of what it means to build a better world, to be an architect of the future. And Laila mentioned architecture so much, which I think is so, in this beautiful building where we are, is so fitting. The last thing that I'll share with you is my mom studies Mesoamerican calendars. She studies calendars, indigenous calendars of Mexico and all of Abya Yala. Abya Yala is the name that we have for Turtle Island. And in the calendar, who remembers that the world was going to end in 2012? Right? So that was actually the end of a cycle. And the actual date is May 5th, 2013. And it's 13 years of cycle till 2026, where it's the transformation period for the next cycle to begin. This is thousands of years of knowledge of the most civilized and connected indigenous communities all across the world, measuring calendars and measuring cycles. So the message in that is that these 13 years are years of transformation. And we need to embrace transformation, and we need to embrace how difficult transformation can be. And so now when we look to 2026, we need to be different people as humanity, because our role is to deepen our consciousness, deepen our knowledge to increase our collective consciousness. Let's forget about convincing everybody that the climate crisis is here. It's deepening our own relationship, taking care of ourselves to take care of the world, which was said so many times so beautifully. The last thing is I'm going to flip the quote of the river and say, the river that remembers and honors its roots will thrive. So let's be that flowing water that remembers our roots, and let's thrive to a future that we're proud of. Thank you, Kamadi.
Wow. Can we stand up together? There is a healing in my sister's voice. I wasn't just listening at what she was saying. I was listening at how she was saying it. And her voice is transformative. And our voices have to be, even the way we say things, we can't act as though our voice can either inspire people to stand or it can make them fearful. When I hear her voice, standing right in face of all the stuff that's going on, and say, wait a minute, we've seen this before, but we've also seen transformation before. We're put here for resilience. The earth is doing it, so why don't we follow the earth? You know, the earth is groaning. But that last piece that she said about the cycle, and I thought about, the remnant. When you said, you don't have to worry about convincing everybody, the prophetic word is always a remnant has to have joy. That means it's not everybody, but the remnant makes it better for everybody. And what we have to decide, we're going to be a part of the remnant. It's never going to be the whole. If you're waiting for everybody to come along, you'll never have joy, right? But if there's a cycle, a dispensation, there's some things end. And as she was talking, I was listening to Kemet Society, where Kemet said the number 13 is not, in fact, a negative number. It is the symbol of resurrection. The number 13. The reinterpretation, thank you for that. Taking things and reinterpreting them. We can't use the same language that the oppressors use. We got to reinterpret, right? We got to say things that move us. Even our language has to shift. And I want to thank you reminding us that the river that forgets its root dries up. Or like they said in South Africa, only a dying mule kicks the hardest. So when you see all this injustice, you don't say, oh, they're so powerful. You say, no, they must be afraid of what they're doing will not stand. And so they're trying to hold on. Or like the difference, and I'll sing here, of whether we see a moment or claim a moment as being a womb or a tomb. My dear Sikh sister reminded me of that. And by the way, I just say, I'm so tired of people talking about our brothers and sisters from Mexicans are coming here. This is their home. We stole it from them. They didn't steal it from us. They coming home. When they come to Texas, and that's home. But anyway, my Sikh sister says, both are dark, the womb and the tomb. Both are scary, the womb and the tomb. Both are compressed, the womb and the tomb. One, no matter how you push, you won't come out of it. The other, if you push, it will birth something that has not yet been, but must be. So you and I must claim that this moment, with all the pain and the pressure, is not our tomb. This is not where we will die. This is where we will be reborn. Or born, in some senses, for the first time. And so in that, they used to sing a song. Craziness would go on. They sung it when they went back to the church after they got beaten on the Edmonds Pettus Bridge. They sung it when folk had died. And they sometimes would sing it with tears until they could sing it with tears of joy. They start out with tears of sadness, but it simply says, I've got a feeling that everything's going to be all right. Now, to do this quickly, you have to right now put in your mind somebody who tells you it's going to be all right. Because there's a part of the song that says, Martin done told me. Rosa done told me. Now, instead of doing all of them individually, I'm going to do two verses, and then I'm going to start singing. And when we get to that part, done told me, call out that name. It could be now or from history. They could be still living, but not living the way we're living, because they're living in the translation and not in this world, but they're living. They're in the great cloud of witnesses. They speak to you in certain ways. So get that name. Take time to get that name. And I'm going to do the first two. I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Oh, I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. My Lord, I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Here's where my joy comes. Don't you know that Martin done told me everything's gonna be all right? I heard him, church. You know, Martin, he done told me everything's gonna be all right. They tried to kill him, but Martin done told me everything's gonna be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Now get ready to put your name. Don't you know that done told me everything gonna be all right? Don't you know, say it, that done told me everything. Don't you know that done told me everything gonna be all right? Come on, pick it up. Be all right. Be all right. Be all right. Don't you know that the ancestors they done told me everything's. Come on, let's go out, clap. Don't you know that the ancestors done told me everything? Don't you know that the done told me everything gonna be all right? Be all right. Be all right. Be all. Last time. That's why we got what? I've got a feeling. Yes, I do. That's my joy right there, right? That's my joy. Whoa, hi. There you go. Everything. You better say it now. Hallelujah. Everything gonna be all. Be all right. Be all right. God bless you.